If this lens had a backstory, it probably studied abroad in Germany during the 1970s, and today it's the lead guitarist in a tribute band called the Sony. Hey there, so Pergear actually makes some pretty interesting lenses, and this full-frame 35mm f1.4 with its classic rangefinder design isn't just cosplay on a vintage lens. There's actually more to it and more things going on here. So in this video we'll be checking out the E-mount version on my Sony a7 IV, but it's also available for L-mount, Nikon Z, and even for you Canon RF shooter since it's a manual lens. Now, from a shooter's perspective, I think it actually offers a lot, both in terms of overall design and character, but also when it comes to things like the tactile experience, which is why I think it's such a fun lens to use, and it definitely gets you more engaged and more connected to the whole shooting experience. So even if there's a tiny bit of cosplay involved, I think the character of the lens actually matches the vintage design pretty well. We get that nice filmic or a vintage look with a very shallow depth of field for a 35 without having to pay the vintage tax. Now here's actually a few side-by-sides with real vintage 35, f2 and the Pergear. Now feel free to comment below which one of these you think is the most expensive lens out of these two, A or B. Now, I'm not going to bore you to death with tons of technical talk and MFT charts, that sort of stuff, and frankly, there's not a whole lot to cover. It's a very simple lens. We got an all-metal build with a 10-blade aperture, and the aperture ring, by the way, sits back here, and it's nice and clicked. The focus wheel is also really nice and smooth, and I've had some sour apples on previous Pergear lenses, but this one is flawless. And having a nice smooth aperture ring like this obviously makes your manual focus experience so much easier. Unless you're a complete idiot like me trying to focus wide open, dead on a spider web like this. But at least we get a nice little sample of bokeh here in the background. We can take a look at the bokeh here as well, where we get fairly round bokeh balls here in the center, and we get some more elongated here on the sides, but nothing too crazy. You want a bit of texture in your shots. That's, apart from layering things, is what makes it a bit more interesting. Now, just like Shakira's hips, the test charts don't lie, so let's take a look at the opposite of bokeh, which is sharpness. So wide open at f1.4, things are looking a bit soft, like it kind of should on a lens like this, not designed to look just like a vintage lens on the outside. At f2.8, things are looking a bit sharper, and we're also seeing a bit more contrast. Stop it down to 5.6 or even f8, now we're getting plenty of clarity across the entire frame. We're also getting some pretty typical barrel distortion and a decent amount of vignetting. So basically most of the ingredients you'd expect or see in a real vintage lens, except for maybe chromatic aberration, which haven't been too bad at all, except for this beautiful shot where there's a tiny bit of fringing and the specular highlights. But the test charts, if we go back to them, kind of looks very neat and clean. The image character is obviously an area where this lens really shines. It's designed to be very character driven. There's even a small amount of micro contrast, even if it's subtle, and I think the color rendering looks pretty great too. So yeah, when it comes to image quality or image character perhaps in this case, I think the character definitely matches the kind of vintage looking exterior, maybe even more so than it matches the pretty modest price tag. Now, in terms of real-world use, that sort of stuff, 35 is obviously one of those, do-it-all focal lengths. It's great for walking around, great for traveling, yeah, and the f1.4 aperture obviously makes it a bit more versatile, and I could definitely see myself bringing this lens out instead of one of my vintage primes, especially if I'm planning on doing mainly stills and just tiny bit of video. I think the size of the focus wheel here on this lens might feel a bit too small if you're planning on doing video for an entire day. Now, If you're a video shooter, then you also want to pick up a 43mm step-up ring and possibly a smaller and more compact variable ND filter if you want to keep things a bit more pocketable. Now, I've actually been trying out these combo VND and CPL filters from K&F lately, not sponsored by the way, but they actually perform quite well and they're super affordable. So if you're looking for like an extra smaller VND instead of putting an 82mm on a lens like this, then yeah, I highly recommend to check out those filters. I will put some links down below along with links to the different mounts and the lenses and all that fun stuff. First things first, I'm not gonna deduct any points for not having autofocus since it's a manual lens, and overall I think it's quite difficult to come up with too many bad things to say about this lens. It's obviously not gonna be the sharpest lens you're gonna have in your collection, but then again, it's gonna be plenty sharp, especially on cameras today like the A7 IV or whatever camera you might be shooting on. The only thing I can think of, I've seen pictures online with the lens hood, which mine didn't come with, so I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. If we move over to the more positive, I have been kind of pleasantly surprised by how much I've enjoyed shooting with this lens. And I think it's a kind of interesting option to vintage lenses. Obviously, vintage lenses are fun, but if you're looking to get into those faster ones like the f1.4, and you take a look at the current pricing on what's available out there, then, you know, this Pergear for $119 makes a very compelling case for itself. And there's obviously not going to be any of the potential issues that you might come across when you're dealing with lenses that are like 50 years old, or this one here, which is from 1963, and that's even older. Plus, you don't have to deal with anything like these mount adapters, because you can get the Pergear as a native EL, Z, or even RF mount, right? So yeah, I think this lens will scratch that vintage lens itch pretty well. So I'm gonna put some links below if you want to pick one of these up and have some fun during the summer. Maybe you're traveling, or maybe you're just bored staying home and you want to switch things up a bit. Shoot some manual focus vintage looking lenses. I think you're gonna enjoy this lens. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbyes. Whoa, water drop. By the way, look at the bark here, the fall off on the sharpness here. And tell me that doesn't look like chef's kiss. And by the way, chef's kiss or kiss in Swedish is pee. This here is probably the spookiest tree I know about. I mean, this is like straight out of the Addams family.